Rainwater Killer, a Haunted Library exclusive series.
It was a closed casket funeral. John had only been 55 years old, gone at my own hands. It was either him or me, and the way I saw it, he was going to die soon. The shooting was still officially under investigation, and I had been put on an unpaid leave of absence until I'm found innocent of the self-defense killing of John Lutz. But I don't intend to stop working off the clock. I faced John's family with tearful eyes, a heavy heart, and a guilty conscience, offering my deepest apologies. They had visited him 2 days prior, and they were fully aware of his deteriorating condition since contracting the rabies virus. They knew he didn't have long, but I still couldn't imagine being his wife and seeing your husband go out like that. If you ask me, he went out in full honor. Even in his worst condition, he was trying to help me solve the case. As I stood outside the Holy Trinity Church among hundreds and hundreds of mourning friends of John, his family, and the citizens of New York who respected John's service through the last 40 years of his tenure, I thought of the late prominent attorney Mark Hilberg, who was shot through the head with an arrow while I was in Arkansas. I looked around at the crowd as people continued to file out of the church where the service had been held. We were all setting ducks. At any given second, we could be shot with automatic fire or a bow. Take your pick. I had to be paranoid. I had to be safe. I had to think outside the box because that's what our killer had been doing all along. And it was no secret today was John's funeral. As crazy and cocky as this guy was, he could easily be spying on us right now with a scope, perched somewhere a few hundred feet away, waiting for the right minutes to pull the trigger. But what was I going to do? Tell everybody to get out of the open and get in their cars? I had literally just shot their father, their friend, and their sheriff. I dismissed the thoughts, said my goodbyes to the faces I recognized, and started off to my car. The overcast skies finally gave in to rain. In a lot of ways, I was still a stranger here in New York, especially when I opened my mouth to speak and my southern accent came spewing out. I felt more isolated today than I had ever since coming up here. On my way to the car, I spotted Larson standing in a crowd. I had not seen him at the beginning of the funeral. He was officially on a paid leave of absence for primarily not being at work the last 2 weeks and not so much as even calling in. He was still a suspect in the case. He gave me a wave, and I nodded. Him and I would sit down again very soon, as we had just weeks ago. Thunder clapped as I got in the car, lightning streaking the sky. Today was Sunday. The funeral had been held just outside of Manhattan, and I would know more about my job status tomorrow. I missed Arkansas. I missed my daughter. I missed so much. Perhaps more than anything, I missed the fact that I used to be able to solve a case and wrap up these cases like crazy. Now this, and I was just as lost today as I was on day one. Still no evidence from the explosion I barely survived on Halloween night back in Arkansas. Nothing on any of the letters that were sent in. No forensics from the tiny rain vials from each killing. The kidnapping of jogger Olivia White had still proved to yield no clues. We simply just didn't have shit. And now we had another problem possibly. The first ever known intentional spread of the rabies virus in humans. It was all pretty surreal and unreal. The guy had turned out to be the most prolific serial killer in the history of the United States in less than 1 year. And I'll say it again, in my opinion, the scariest of all serial killers. As I turned off Sycamore Street, I began to question my own sanity at this point. I had never shot another human being in the line of duty, let alone a friend who I'd worked with side by side for months. The rain began to come down harder. I positioned my mirror, glancing in the back. I didn't get in my car now without checking the back seats. But even though I checked the back, I still find myself looking multiple times as I drive despite, since Keene was assaulted and taken captive by this freak. Imagine not even feeling safe in your own car. Imagine having to double check, triple check, the back seat of your own car just to make sure some serial killer wasn't back there hunched over, hiding, waiting to come out and strangle you as you got into your car, or even as you drove down the road. As I drove, I remembered one of the letters read, "I am a wild, rabid animal in every sense of the word, dressed over in human flesh." Now, it was damn coincidental that he had mentioned the word rabid in that letter, only to infect John with rabies months down the road. A lot of things were starting to come into play here. Of course, the serial killer himself didn't have rabies like he said, but he had the mind of a man who had rabies, just without all the health complications. My phone went off, revealing a text message. It was Olivia White, the jogger who had been kidnapped and tied to a tree. She wanted me to call her. Well, I called her, and what she revealed to me was terrifying. She had been seeing a pair of eyes looking in her windows at night. Not much of any facial features, just eyes. And the Rainwater Killer was known to have distinct, scary eyes. Upon calling police, all on the night shift, the pair of eyes vanished. Nobody had informed me of this, most likely because I was on a leave. She wasn't aware of my situation, so she had texted me. I drove over to her house. I found myself sitting down and talking to her on the living room couch for hours. I didn't realize until later how bad I needed an ear. Sometimes the ear of the opposite sex is a great thing, especially when she's around my age. She was very traumatized still, exhibiting the same signs of paranoia and nightmares that Beth Nobles was, and I can only assume still is, considering it hasn't yet been 4 months since her husband was killed and she was put through the ringer all night in a game of hide-and-go-seek in the woods of Oklahoma with our perp. Around 8 p.m., after a few cups of coffee and one walk around her house, I was getting ready to leave when she walked to her kitchen and screamed. I jumped up and ran into the kitchen, my hand on my gun. She stood in front of her kitchen window, her hand over her mouth, visibly shaken. She pointed to the window, her eyes wide. I put my hand on her shoulder and motioned for her to silently stay quiet as I crept out of her sliding glass doors to the kitchen. Her backyard was huge, with no privacy fence. I drew my gun as I slid the glass doors back. I made sure that she locked it before I moved around the house. I mean, who the hell could this be? A random voyeur who was planning to break in her home? Or was it in fact the Rainwater Killer showcasing more of his brazen antics, showing up when I was at the house? As if he hadn't already done enough damage to her. I rounded the house carefully and slowly, noticing that the rain had stopped. Neighbors' yard spotlights gave me just enough light to see around the house, yet still stay hidden myself. The backyard led into a ditch that was filled with large rocks. Out of the ditch led up a slight hill to another subdivision with solid wooden privacy fences. In the ditch, I looked back at the house. She had turned off all the lights. I made my way back to the porch, unsure of what to think. I mean, through her paranoia and her traumatic event, had she been seeing things altogether? I wanted to scream out into the night to tell this crazy bastard that it wasn't raining and for him to go the fuck home. But I would deem myself crazy at that point. What I didn't know was that I was being watched. I was about to knock on the sliding glass doors to get back in when a stern hand grabbed my shoulder.